What's up, fight fans? This is Kurtville with Counterpunch Boxing News, and I have some new news concerning Timothy Desert Storm Bradley. Timothy Bradley rips Errol Spence, okay, for not taking the Terence Crawford fight. This is what Terence Crawford said, should I say Timothy Bradley said about Errol Spence. He said that Errol Spence doesn't want to fight Terence Crawford. He's ducking the fight. He's clearly ducking the fight. He says, in fact, let me go further. And mind you, this is when he cut off Andre Ward, because you know Andre Ward is friends with both Errol Spence and Terence Bud Crawford. And he cut Andre Ward off like, no. I can tell you what I feel about Errol Spence and exactly what he's doing. He's not going to fight Terence Crawford. There's no guarantee that he would fight Terence Crawford, even if Terence Crawford went to the PBC. Okay? And on top of that, I will go a step further and say that I don't think that Errol Spence would even go to fight Canelo. Why would he go to fight Canelo at 160 when he can't even fight in his own backyard at 147, fighting the best pound-for-pound fighter in the world, Terence Bud Crawford? Those are the words of Timothy Bradley. And Timothy Bradley just said he's trying to make all the money that he possibly can before getting out of the sport, and he plans to retire undefeated. Wow. Okay. Let me counterpunch. Okay, because a lot of people want to know my intake on this. I think Timothy Bradley, I think his statements are partially true. He has some points, but I don't agree with everything that he's saying, okay? I do agree about the Terence Crawford thing. You know, I do agree that there's a possibility that if Terence Crawford went to the PBC, I don't think that he would get the fight. See, that he would get the fight with Errol Spence when he's probably 35 and Errol Spence is probably 32 or 33. You see what I'm saying? I think the fight will eventually happen, but I don't think it'll happen when it's supposed to happen. When Errol Spence is regarded as one of the best welterweights and Terence Crawford is regarded as one of the best fighters, it would be at a degree where Terence Crawford is no longer looked at in that light. Okay, when the fight is less risky, when Terence Crawford is older, when he's a little slower, when he's missed a couple steps. Yeah, the fight will be made then, because the fighter that Al Haymon really wants to focus on is Errol Spence. Okay, that's one thing about Al Haymon. Al Haymon, as long as you have that O and you're a nice Floyd Mayweather base model fighter, which means you are undefeated, he will take care of you and put you under his wing. That's why I feel that a lot of things haven't happened for Deontay Wilder lately, because of the step back from support from Al Haymon. Okay, that's, you know, my opinion, my counterpunch on that. However, when he says that, in fact, he won't go up to fight Canelo Alvarez, I totally disagree with that. I think he will go up to fight Canelo Alvarez for a stupid amount of money. I think he would do that. And the reason why I think he would do that is, one, because of the money, but two, if he loses, no one would really look at Errol Spence like they would look at him if he lost to Terence Crawford. Do you understand? The loss wouldn't mean as much if he went to fight Canelo Alvarez, because Canelo Alvarez is a 160-pounder. He's a champion at 168. He's also a champion at 175. So he's a champion currently at 3 different weight classes, okay? And if he did fight Errol Spence, it would not be a weight hydration clause or whatever, a rehydration clause. It wouldn't be any of that, okay? So he might come in as big as 175 on that night, okay? Because he's been fighting in each one. Maybe like 172, 173, I would probably give him on the day after weigh-in, okay? So that's why I feel Errol Spence is not taking or is taking that fight, because he knows if I lose, I'm going to get paid regardless. But the loss won't be as much, is because Canelo itself is a challenge, because he's in a weight class 2 weight classes north of Errol Spence currently. Okay, and he's the unified champion. So hey, good effort, right? They would look at him like people looked at Kell Brook. like people looked at Mikey Garcia, like people looked at a lot of fighters that went up in weight, you know, and attempted to get a belt in a higher weight class, but the fighter was, and the champion was too big. Thus far, they came up short. Okay, so a lot of people would look at that like that. So, you know, Errol Spence, you know, of course, would do that. He would do that for that amount of money because he knows there's not enough money, including the Terence Crawford fight, that's bigger than Canelo Alvarez. So I disagree with Timothy Bradley. However, the problem with Timothy Bradley isn't that he's saying certain things against Errol Spence, is where he is politically. He is an ESPN commentator. Anytime you have an ESPN commentator or anybody on another side of the street and they say something subjective about another fighter from another network, they're going to be looked at as biased automatically. So Timothy Bradley is in a lose-lose situation as it is. Okay? He can't win for losing. Even if he would have said something on the grounds, anything he would have said, they would have immediately, oh, you know, he's an ESPN commentator. He sold his soul to ESPN when he signed to be a commentator for ESPN. You know what I mean? So people are going to do that, you know, and on top of that, the backstory between Timothy Bradley and Errol Spence Jr. Errol Spence Jr. says that Timothy Bradley ducked Errol Spence. Well, if that's the case, a lot of people did, but I disagree on that too. Okay, a little small backstory. Timothy Bradley was mandated to fight Errol Spence Jr. at one point of time when Errol Spence was little known, when, you know, this was after the sparring with Floyd Mayweather that gave him that badge of good skill set from taking on Floyd, okay, and holding his own against Floyd. He was made, you know, he kept knocking guys out and beating guys, you know, and he wanted those fights. And it took Errol Spence a long time to get the fights that he's wanting now, or, you know, or he claims he wants now, okay? But none of those fights were Terence Crawford. Okay, those fights, he wanted Keith Thurman because Keith Thurman was that top dog in the welterweight division once upon a time before he started getting hurt and injured and all that good stuff. Well, the argument was that, hey, Timothy Bradley ducked the mandatory from fighting Errol Spence, but to do what though? Timothy Bradley fought Manny Pacquiao, right? So Errol Spence is screaming, hey, you ducked me a long time ago, Timothy Bradley. He was like, okay, touche. But dude, I ducked you to fight a guy that I already beat that you're trying to fight to this day. And his name is Manny Pacquiao. And I'm not talking about a 42-year-old Manny Pacquiao, you guys, a damn senator. I'm talking about a guy that was, what, 5-6 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. He was still in his 30s at that time. So the younger Manny Pacquiao was, the better he was. Right? So it really doesn't make any sense on the argument, and the argument gets fizzed out simply because Timothy Bradley had bigger fish to fry. Timothy Bradley, you know, was with a superstar Hall of Fame trainer, Teddy Atlas, at the time, and he was going to take on Manny Pacquiao for the third time. Okay, that fight would have superseded any Errol Spence who, because nobody knew who he was at that time anyway. Okay, that would have overshadowed that fight altogether. And you know what people would have said? People would have said this. If Timothy Bradley would have took the fight with Errol Spence, his mandatory, right? If he would have took it as mandatory, what would have been said? Timothy Bradley is a ducker. He ducked Manny Pacquiao for the third fight because he knew Manny Pacquiao was going to beat him again anyway. Which the second fight was real competitive. The first fight was real competitive. I think Manny won all of them. And he's definitely won the third because he got dropped in the third. And I think that was the reason for Timothy Bradley to say, you know what?